It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty.
Greetings and salutations. You've stumbled upon the latest episode of Military Movie Talk. What does that mean? Well, that means you've discovered a safe place for men to pull up a chair and crack open their favorite beverage and have lively conversations about their favorite military movies. 'Cause here we don't take a look in a book, and we don't ride on a magic school bus. No, we're men. We speak with authority about subjects that we are not qualified to. And today's journey into irreverence for proper research has led us once again to the House of Mouse with the 1957 live-action adventure, Johnny Tremain. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, which I assume is most of you, I mean, maybe not, but probably most of it, whatever. This film is about the adventures of a young teenage boy, bearing witness to the exploits of the Sons of Liberty and the events immediately preceding the outbreak of hostilities in the American Revolutionary War, culminating in the battles of Lexington and Concord. Those battles of which will be our tactical analysis for the day. Now, if you're wondering how young Johnny fits into all this, don't worry about it. He's probably not going to come back up for the rest of the video. Look, if you're that curious, go buy a copy for yourself, because it's not on Disney Plus, and they refuse to acknowledge my strongly worded letters. Okay, so for this episode, once again, we're going to be coming at this battle from the perspective of the quote-unquote bad guys of the film, the British military. And I have a reason for this. See, I think the political and tactical situation around Boston in the early 1770s is actually really interesting. Especially if you examine it through the eyes of this man, General Thomas Gage, who would become the military governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony post-Boston Tea Party. And the guy who may have had the most headache-inducing job in America for any British government employee at this time. Why, you ask? Well, let's discuss it together as we get into the scenario. Okay, so a few decades prior to our film beginning, there was this little conflict, you see, called the 7 Years' War. Or if you're cool like me, you may refer to it as the French and Indian War. What? Well, everyone who was anyone was there. There was young George Washington, there was Mel Gibson, there was Daniel Day-Lewis. Well, this little war was expensive. We're talking like King George the III had to cut out his venti caramel macchiato like for the rest of forever expensive. What to do, oh what to do. Well, at this part in history, European leaders were collecting far-off lands like they were playing cards. Colonies! So it seemed only fair that the good citizens of the American colonies should help pay for the war. After all, it was those a-holes that were just talking about Tom Brady, or whatever people from New England do, and not helping fight. Okay, to be fair, a lot of them actually did help fight, but the point remains, it's time for them to pay some of those taxes. No representation. Well, as it turns out, those silly colonists didn't care much for that whole deal. Naturally, this caused tensions to rise between the American colonies and the British government. The colonists in the Boston area formed the Sons of Liberty, a clandestine group of Bostonians attempting to oppose the Crown's encroachment on their rights.
Sons of Liberty. But who are you? Everyone in Boston who believes their liberties are worth fighting for.
Tensions between the colonists and the British government come to a boiling point when the Sons of Liberty show their disapproval for the new tea tax, beginning a long-standing tradition of Americans not approving of hot tea.
The ages, it all comes from having to grow. In fact, I do believe that the very seed of my family began to germinate as far back as the 40s.
So now at first the Sons of Liberty attempt this tax to not come into effect by preventing the tea from simply being offloaded from the ships themselves. This, however, is always going to be a temporary solution, and the Sons of Liberty do attempt to negotiate with the current governor, led by men like Dr. Joseph Warren and Samuel Adams. Once it's clear that a diplomatic solution with the tea tax is not going to be able to be reached, the Sons of Liberty take a more kinetic approach. You know, reportedly, right before the Boston Tea Party, Samuel Adams was heard offering his boys some liquid courage.
Sam Adams, Boston Lager. Declare your independence from common beer.
I don't care who you are. That's funny right there. You can't laugh at that. You need to get out of here, because that's funny.
While dressed as Mohawk warriors to disguise their identities, the Sons of Liberty board the British merchant ship, dumping its entire cargo into the Boston harbor. Well, that seems a little extreme. Yeah, well, you know what? You need to say the big scary word with me. Context. See, the American colonies didn't just see themselves as any other British colony. No, they were Englishmen, just the same as any other back home. And the idea that they might have less rights than those back in England was downright intolerable. Well, turns out old George I didn't like this very much. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but allegedly he said something along the lines of, "Those Yanks completely ruined that tea. The Atlantic Ocean has far too much water in it for a good proportion, and it's completely too salty to boot. And dressing up like Indians is completely culturally insensitive. We must do something about this." Well, what they did about that was basically put Boston under military occupation, with our boy General Gage installed as military governor. And to insult to injury, they brought back the Quartering Act, where British soldiers got to come and stay in your home while they were in town. Which quite frankly just ticked off everyone even more than they already were. I mean, imagine Private Tommy as roommates with you and your family. You come home after a long day and you reach into your fridge and, oh, the last Diet Coke is gone. Tommy. Well, whatever. I'll just kick back, relax, and watch some Netflix. What? Too many devices on this network. Tommy. And look, that's why I find General Gage's predicament so fascinating. The man is thrown into a situation where he has to restore order and the Crown's control over Boston, over British citizens, over Englishmen. Be too easy with them, and nothing is accomplished, and the citizenry just walk all over you. Be too hard, and you risk pushing the colonists towards revolution. Violent revolution. And be it right, wrong, or indifferent, that was General Gage's mission. To maintain control of a population that is rapidly growing fed up with being controlled. General Gage has received reports that unsanctioned militia companies are drilling and storing up arms and powder for possible conflict with the Crown. How General Gage goes about this crisis will determine if he's able to maintain peace and control, or whether things will devolve into armed conflict, or even all-out war with the colonies. Now, General Gage, being the thoughtful commander that he is, requests a meeting with one of the Sons of Liberty's known heads, Dr. Joseph Warren, to see if he can convince the Patriots to voluntarily lay down their arms. Which, by the way, this is probably the best scene in the movie. A family movie with actually a lot of mature and thought-provoking scenes. Not like today's kids' movies, where we just get
Silas Ramsbottom.
Bottom.
To be fair, though, that actually is quite funny. Well, swings and roundabouts, I suppose. Anyway, the meeting between General Gage and Dr. Warren does go forward.
And now, Doctor, the fate of Boston lies on this table between us. I have lived in these provinces for too many years, sir, to enjoy the responsibilities which have now been thrust upon me. I am a soldier, sir, and must take my orders from the ministry and power. The illegal bodies of militia, for instance, drilling on every village green, they must be disbanded. And I am also aware that considerable stores of munitions are being assembled. They must be surrendered at once.
I'm sorry, General, but that I do not have the power to do.
Why not?
Because free men will never consent to give up the means of defending their liberties.
You realize, Doctor, this means that I must enforce my orders.
I do, sir. We have our duty. We cannot deny you yours.
I know I had to chop it down a lot, but this is how you write opponents having a dialogue. Take note, not all these trash modern-day detective procedurals where the obnoxious, overconfident detective goes, "Hey, you're an evil, evil man who does bad, bad things. Anyway, would you mind confessing now?" No. General Gage understands the commander's intent, in this case being George I, that he needs to maintain peace in the colonies, but also understands that he can't allow the local militias to just stockpile arms when their explicit use is to be used against the very king that he works for. Dr. Warren's last few lines. General Gage tells Dr. Warren that the militias must lay down their arms. And what does he say? He says he doesn't have the power to do that. And when Gage presses him on why, because free men will never consent to give up the means of defending their liberties. And once it's clear that the two men are at an impasse, Gage explains, "You realize this means I have to enforce my orders." And Warren's response, his response, "We have our duty. We cannot deny you yours." This was the kind of dialogue that was in the 50s, in family movies. And far be it from me, and granted an idiot in his basement, to criticize the wonders of modern Hollywood writing, but why is it that it seems like we have to wait for a decade or more between A Lord of the Rings or A No Country for Old Men? Where did the Tolkiens and the McCarthys go? This used to be the standard. Anyway, point is, it looks like the British military and the Patriot forces are now on an irreversible collision course. And that, dear friends, must mean that it's time for us to look at our MET-TC, the mission. British forces in the Massachusetts Bay Colony have received intelligence that a cache of arms and powder are being stored in or about the town of Concord, approximately 20 miles from Boston. These arms are being stored by local militias against the British Crown in the event that hostilities between Britain and the colonies breaks out. A task force of British units stationed in Boston is to move to target in Concord and locate and either seize or destroy the illegal arms. British forces are to avoid hostilities if possible, but it is paramount to the mission that the arms and powder be seized. The enemy. The militia units around the Boston area are the purest definition of citizen soldiers. Almost everyone in these units, from officers on down, are not professional soldiers. They all have normal day jobs, and as such, can only drill so often. They are generally not as disciplined and as tactically sound in maneuver as their active-duty European-trained opponents. And yes, tactically trained. Look, let me give my little contribution to dispelling this long-time misconception of units back then. But they did use tactics. I know it's popular to believe that armies back then just lined up and shot at each other, bang, 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 until one side just gave up or was all gone. But maneuver warfare was doctrine back then too, just as it is today. It was just in more structured units that often did stand shoulder to shoulder to maximize the effects of their muskets, which, by today's standards, were inaccurate and slow to reload. These militia companies were formed by guys who lived in and around certain towns, commanded by captains, and these companies could come together to then form militia regiments, although how much training got done at the regimental level, probably not a lot. These militia units are primarily armed with the individual members' personal arms, mostly smoothbore non-military muskets, and they usually have little to nothing in the way of uniforms, though that was somewhat depending on funding. Troops. The British task force will be commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith.
How tough can he be? With a name like Francis.
With the executive officer being Major John Pitcairn, a Royal Marine. Insert whatever joke you like here about how his favorite brand of tea is Crayola or whatever. They will be commanding a force of approximately 700 men.
If I may have a small picked force, say a detachment of grenadier and light infantry companies from each regiment.
Okay, so let me explain. Every British infantry regiment at this time had several line companies of normal infantry, and then one company of grenadier and one company of light infantry. And in cases like these companies could be grouped together to form larger specialty units. The Grenadier Company's name comes from the word grenade, as these units were used as the main assault units of the army. And although by this point in history they aren't really being issued grenades anymore, they are still comprised of typically the tallest, most intimidating men in the regiment, and are used as assaulters. They also get these really cool bearskin hats. That's very nice. That's very drippy. That's something the kids say nowadays. They, instead of saying it looks nice, they say nice drip. As far as the light companies go, their main job is scouting and skirmishing. And while they can fight in a line like the rest of the army, they're also trained to break off into pairs and small groups and act almost like designated marksmen. These troops wear the customary for the time red coats and are armed with a smoothbore brown best musket, or I think like the long land pattern is its official name. They might have been getting the short land pattern by this point, but probably not. Anyway, it has its accompanying bayonet, and they're given a cartridge box for their ammo and a canteen and a haversack for their sustainment gear. The NCOs at this point are being issued either spontoons like a big spear or halberds, a big axe. These aren't, from my understanding, so much used for combat as almost like something big that the rest of the guys can kind of dress themselves off their NCOs with. Though it's also my understanding that as the conflict drags on, this will become less common for them to have that, and they're going to be trading these in for muskets. And then the officers, meanwhile, are going to be armed with sabers. They may have flintlock pistols, but if they do, that's going to be an item that they just privately purchased on their own. The terrain. Boston itself is effectively an island, spare a small neck that connects it from the greater land of Massachusetts. The Massachusetts terrain is hilly and heavily forested. However, by the 1770s, there is a well-established road system between the towns and villages that are large enough to help facilitate troop movement. It's around 20 miles from Boston to Concord. Now, in order to keep the distance a little shorter and hopefully help maintain OPSEC, the task force will be rowed across the bay and will begin their march from Cambridge. Time. As previously stated, in order to maintain OPSEC, the operation will be launched across the bay under the cover of darkness. If the task force movements are detected in advance, that could give rebel elements the time they need in order to move the cache or to coordinate a response. In order to further discuss that and how that works, we'll now transition to civilian considerations. The Massachusetts population is made up of many citizens loyal to the Crown who may be willing to help how they can. But for every one of those, there will also be a citizen loyal to the Patriot cause, willing to feed intelligence to the rebel spy network, or even to take up arms against the Crown should the shooting start. The task force path will take them past many houses and hamlets where it will be possible to be compromised. Also, since public support for the Crown is of utmost importance to the mission, not unnecessarily injuring any civilians or destroying any property may be key to every officer. And so every officer on that op needs to think like a civil affairs officer. Alright, there's your briefing, armchair commanders. Now let's see how it happens in the movie. Well, unfortunately for Colonel Smith and the task force, due to the increased activity from units mustering in Boston and the Patriot Intelligence Network, Task Force No Second Amendment yet has already been compromised before they even leave.
Tonight, all right, that's certain. They're beating to arms in every square. It should be conquered. We have much of our powder there.
17 miles.
Wait a minute. Johnny.
Yes, sir?
You've ridden most of the roads for the Observer. Suppose they did use their boats and began their march at Cambridge. How far would it be to Concord then?
I'd make it 17 miles.
That's it.
And even as the task force rose out of Boston, beginning their march, rebel agitators Billy Dawes and Paul Revere are already spreading the word of the British troop movement.
What's all the noise down there? The redcoats are coming!
The task force continues its movement through the night before coming to the town of Lexington with population between 700 and 1,000 people. Yes, that's what Google told me. What of it? There, the advance column under the command of Major Pitcairn encounters a contingent of around 70 enemy militia under the command of Captain John Parker.
Let every one of you remember your orders. You are not to fire unless fired upon. We stand upon our rights, not upon the force of arms.
The British infantry form up across from the militia. Whatever happens next, it will undoubtedly set the tone for the rest of the mission. Major Pitcairn attempts to talk down the militia and have them return home. The two sides sit and stare at each other until... The two sides exchange musket fire, causing several casualties on both sides. Tensions between the British government and the Patriot forces have now reached its boiling point, and hostilities have now officially broken out. Begun. The Revolutionary War has. The militia break contact with the British forces, opening up the road to Concord. Although once they're there, they're unable to find the war material they sought for. Nearby, one of the British companies sets to destroy a bridge to limit the rebel movements. However, by this point, much more of the militia have assembled, and moved to prevent the British forces from cutting them off. This time, the British forces, being severely outnumbered, yield the battlefield, and the company links up with the rest of the task force, now withdrawing back to Boston empty-handed, with the Patriot militias in hot pursuit. As the task force withdraws, they are continuously harassed by fire from seemingly every piece of concealment on the road, and despite their best efforts, the task force is unable to close with and engage the enemy militias. This actually continues so long that after a while the British infantry decide to not even bother with their react-to-contact drills. The task force limps back into Boston, having not accomplished its mission, and having suffered multiple wounded and KIA. The Patriot militias have now surrounded Boston, and General Gage and his forces are now besieged.
We have been vanquished by an idea, a belief in human rights.
And that's where the movie leaves us. P.S. If you'd like to hear about what happens next in this little tale, feel free to watch my previous video on The Crossing. Shameless plug! And there you have it. The British suffer a tactical and ultimately massive strategic defeat that will ultimately cost Britain her colonies in America. Thank you once again. Or if you're a newcomer, thank you for the first time. If you were in General Gage's boots, how would you have handled the situation? Would you have passed out candy to appease the Bostonians? Would you have ruled with an iron fist? Let me know down below, and more importantly, discuss with your fellow movie and tactics friends. Until next time, armchair commanders, keep your powder dry.